Right. Well, mm, that was skin of our teeth stuff, wasn't it? A little bit concerning that one. A little bit concerning. Very frustrating. Very really very frustrating that match. I think there's a time for probably more, you know, constructive reflection. Um, we can probably talk about the fact that Bodo Glimt are, a side that probably a lot of people underestimate, don't give enough credit to. Absolutely dominate their league. They play very well. We all the things that we heard about them before we played them in the Europa League. However, being brutally honest, and this might be arrogant English Premier League fan stuff or whatever, we should be turning that team over. I know we had a few players missing. I know we're still sort of early on into the Frank project and all that type of thing. A lot of new players settling in, so on and so forth. However, I still don't feel like it's much of a stretch or much of a kind of knee jerk or impulsive or entitled thing to say that really a Premier League team that has the resources that Spurs do, that has spent the sort of money that Spurs do. We can talk about how we've spent that money, and I fully intend to do that. But we should be turning them over. We should be, quite simply. That's my sort of my bottom line on that performance. We should be turning them over. We didn't. Positives to this, once again, we fought our way back. We were 2-0 down. And I get it. I know some people will just want this to be a rage session, and some people will want me to, give the club both barrels, give Frank both barrels, all that type of thing. However, is Champions League away? I imagine, but a Glimt will probably give teams comparable to us good games this season. And again, I'm sort of sat here relieved that we've managed to get that, get a point there at least. I'm encouraged by the fact that once again we have managed to get ourselves back into a game. But that also doesn't mean that I don't have concerns about the fact that we have found ourselves behind again against, let's say, inferior opponent, that we have been lacking much intensity to our play, seemingly bereft of confidence, bereft of ideas. That side is concerning to me, you know? So there are always glimmers of hope, and there should be. This shouldn't be a case of, I've aired a few opinions about this on Twitter, and responses have ranged from, people sort of being tacitly frank out already, which I do just think is over the top, to be honest. Um, it's a hard one to honestly, it's a hard one to know where this lies tonight. Do I look? Maybe I'm a frank apologist. Maybe it's I don't have any like personal agenda. I don't have any dog in the fight when it comes to Thomas Frank. He wasn't somebody I was like in love with before we were linked to him. When we were first linked to him, I said, yeah, he'd be a pretty underwhelming but all right appointment. He'd raise our floor and all that type of thing. So, fine. That's kind of where I'm at. So I don't really have a kind of, you know, he's not my guy. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we've brought Pochettino back, and I would definitely, if we brought Pochettino back, or had brought him back at some point, and we were not starting off very well, you can bet your bottom dollar that I would be bending over backwards to give El Jefe, El Gran Queso, all the excuses you can imagine for Mauricio Pochettino. For Thomas Frank, I don't think his excuses. What I give Thomas Frank is number one, he's not going anywhere for a long, long time. Okay. Like I think we can sort of settle on that. So you might as well get behind it. You know, way that's some cheerleading and a half, isn't it? We might as well get behind it. I can't really be bothered to talk about the manager's future after 5, 6 games, 7 games, 8 games, whatever it is now. I think I've been saying 5 or 6 games. I'll still be saying 5 or 6 games in a few months' time. He's only had 5 or 6 games. Give him a chance. We've just lost 4-0 10 times in a row. Um, my point is like, look, tonight, does it rest on the players? Does it rest on Frank? I couldn't really say. What I will say, and I know I normally do like the players at the end, and I probably will still, I'll definitely still do that. But the thing that I do think needs to be said is where we're essentially at right now, in my opinion, is that we have a decent starting 11. I think we've got and I know it's a squad. Well, this is actually the point, right? It's supposed to be a squad game. I don't think we have enough quality. I don't think we have enough quality in depth. I look at players basically since I said this, I'm sort of repeating my point on Twitter, but since Pochettino, since that team faded out, since that brilliant team faded out, we didn't replace them and we didn't, we sort of spoken about the lack of legacy planning for that squad, how we slowly watched it fade away. We've had a number of players, and actually, I would say a remarkable amount of players who all fall into the category of being quite good. However, we're not really sure quite how good they are or not. And around so many of these players have just consistently been culture wars. You know, you think about off the top of my head, Lo Celso and Dombele. You think about Pierre Højbjerg. You think about Brennan Johnson. You think about Richarlison. We think about even players like Bentancur. I personally really like him, but you could probably even chuck Kulusevski into this mix. We're talking like loads and loads and loads of players that we tend to kind of get on a whim. We either have a kind of an in there to get a player, or there's a James Maddison. I'm sorry, James Maddison is probably another example of this. We maybe do miss James Maddison, but again, James Maddison was an opportunistic piece of business. James Maddison was another one of those players that the clubs who are bigger than us, should we say, in the established pecking order, didn't want. And so now we've constantly found ourselves in this position where we have a squad of players that we can't really agree on how good or not they are. There's a couple of players I think in this team that we would all unanimously say are amazing. I think most people are all agreed on the fact that Christian Romero is a very talented player. Most people would agree on the fact that Mickey van der Ven is a very talented player. Although I think he struggled a bit tonight. I'm going to say I do think he struggled a bit without Romero's kind of experience and presence alongside him. Bergval's a very promising youngster. Pat Matasar, I think, is a very promising young player. And then obviously we got Kudus, who is just phenomenal, but wasn't playing for most of the game. Jed Spence, who is making a good fist of, resurrecting his career. But I think we can probably say that, it's going to take a bit more time for us to say he is truly a brilliant player. Look, my point is that I don't know how many really good players Spurs have. I don't know how many really good players we have. And this to me is a ripple, and this is a scar if we want to be dramatic about it and use quite charged language. But this is one of the ripple effects of the way in which the club has been run. Quite simply, I mean, the club was run this way prior to the building of the stadium and everything. However, the club, the squads, the stature of the club has gone up levels in that time. And we can look. This is a conversation. This is a tired conversation, but the way in which the club operate never changed until Daniel Levy left. I mean, we don't know now. Let's wait and see, and I'll get onto that. But Daniel Levy continued to operate the football club like we were the Spurs that he first picked up, and when he was signing Aaron Lennon, when he was signing Tom Huddlestone, Michael Dawson, Andy Reid, players like that. That's what we continue to do, and that's what we continue to do even when we were a team that was finishing in the Champions League or whatever. We coasted on that Pochettino team for as long as we could. We absolutely wrung every single bit of juice out of that out of that Pochettino team, out of that era. And now what we've seen for the past few years is quite simply a group of players who are, for the most part, good, And it feels harsh when we go after these players. It feels harsh when we dig them out. And I feel harsh a lot of the time because I look at a lot of them and I think they are pretty decent. Even Højbjerg, who I always went for, and anybody that's listened to this for any amount of time will know how much I always went for Højbjerg. And look, he's having a decent enough career at a club like Marseille now, right? But again, he's not tearing up trees, is he? He's been an all right player, and that's kind of where we're at. So I guess the main thing for me now is, could Frank be inspiring this group of players more? He's been given Xavi Simons, he's been given Mohamed Kudus. We've got Lucas Bergvall, who seems to be improving a lot, going up levels. Other things that he could be doing that could maybe improve this side? Yeah, probably. But I reckon he is trying to do that right now. It is a work in progress. And we can talk about things that he hasn't learned. We can talk about, the Wolves game the other day, how he arguably didn't learn from the Bournemouth performance a few games prior to that and repeated some of the same mistakes. I haven't really kind of had enough time to absorb what people are saying about this in terms of his managerial failings approaching this game. I'm always hesitant to start going after managers. I know the immediate thing is, why has he dropped Kudus? Why has he dropped? But why has he rotated Kudus? Why has he rotated Xavi Simons? We don't know how fit or not they were. We don't. It's that thing, isn't it? I can't imagine he's been desperate to rotate those players out. But has he thought they're both a bit leggy? They're both looking a bit knackered. Kudus especially gives 150% for that's a bit Spinal Tap, isn't it? He switches it up to 11 every single game that he plays, and is playing away against a team who, can spring a surprise, who are kind of a tricky customer at times, but ultimately are one of the minnows in this competition. Is that the opportunity to rest Mohamed Kudus? I reckon you can forgive a manager for thinking that maybe is an opportunity to do it. But for me, players should, all of our players should be of a quality where they could handle an occasion like this. I'm not really buying I'm not really buying that they shouldn't be able to. And this is one of those things that, when I'm sort of talking about the players that we have at our disposal, and I'm not basing this just off of this game. I'm basing this off of the past couple of seasons, of the start to this season, of the observations that we've all been able to make. If we are looking at this kind of Tavistock ENIC era as something that's going to be new, that is going to try and have Spurs competing with teams like Arsenal, teams like Liverpool, then we need to learn from teams like that and just start to get brutal, really start to get brutal, because we've seen Liverpool do that. Basically, from that point that we beat them at Wembley, that game that Jurgen Klopp himself has spoken about, when he realised, look, if we want to overtake a team like Spurs, let alone compete with the teams above them, it's going to take some changes. It's going to take us buying lots of really good players. And that's what Liverpool did from that point. And they were ruthless with players. It's what Arsenal have been like, The first couple of years under Arteta when they stuttered and they, you know, did all right, but didn't really see also under Emery, they're sort of post Wenger era. And then they just had that point clearly, didn't they? Where Arteta must have laid his cards on the table and just said, we need more players. We need better players. We need players of a certain quality. And they have been ruthless in rotating out players, and that's what we need to do. Like we need to stop being in this position. And what I'm talking about is if Spurs are aspiring to be a top team, right? If Spurs are aspiring to be a top team, if we are wanting to go toe to toe with teams like Liverpool, with teams like Arsenal, Guillermo Vicario, not good enough. He just isn't good enough. We can talk about how what he does. Oh, his reflex saves are decent or this. Overall, he is not good enough. He wouldn't get into Arsenal's team. He wouldn't get into Liverpool's team. He wouldn't get into Newcastle's team even. I'm not having Vicario over Pope. I think Pope is similarly frustrating though. At least just watching the Arsenal game the other day, his kicking is appalling. Actually, cut from a similar cloth really, Vicario and Pope. So maybe I'll put them on a par. Who like Liverpool doesn't get into Liverpool's team, definitely doesn't get into City's team. It's you know Richarlison just simply not good enough. Great, he started the season well, and yeah, I'm going to be a bit gammon about it, but it just kind of irritated me a bit seeing the club put out like videos of them training, and of course Richarlison is prattling about in training again. And I know that's so anti-fun, and I know that's so you're I know that is like knee jerk, and I know that's basing my opinion on a player from like one clip of training, which might have just been one light-hearted moment in an otherwise intense and well-trained session. But it just irritated me. And it just irritates me that, on like the Ballon d'Or night, he is making stupid photoshops of himself winning the Ballon d'Or. Like he's not serious. He's not a serious player. Like you actually have an opportunity there. You're playing for Spurs. You have been at least at one point. I don't know if he is anymore. Brazil's number 9. Like why are you doing jokes about yourself winning the Ballon d'Or? Why aren't you striving to try and be a player that is that good? You know, but just bin him off, man. Like it's just again, this is like years we've been having this conversation around him. He's not good enough. Brennan Johnson, I will be forever grateful. I'll be forever grateful to the lad for that goal in Bilbao for winning us the trophy. I love him, but we've all known for a long time he is not good enough. His finishing, great. He can score every now and again, and we can say maybe if he'd have played in the early noughties, he would have been an amazing number 9 or all this type of thing. Even that, I think is, I think I've even likened him to being like, oh, he could have been like a Defoe type player. Nonsense, man. That is me completely underselling Defoe. And I think one of my hottest takes about Jermaine Defoe is I think his like contribution to Spurs and his Spurs career is massively underplayed. I saw the club put out that it was like the anniversary of Clint Dempsey's winner at Old Trafford. It was the first time we'd won there in years, I think. The work that Defoe did outside of the box, not only in bringing the ball down, but holding off Rio Ferdinand and then threading through just a disgusting through pass to, I want to say Bale. I think it was Bale that set up Dempsey. Was ludicrous work, and I've never seen Brennan Johnson do anything similar to that. Um, I think Brendan Johnson seems like a nice lad. I saw him in Madison's thing. I think he seems like a sensitive soul. I think he seems like a very nice kid. Um, I think he's faced horrible abuse from fans or whatever on Instagram and all that type of stuff. I think all that stuff is very unpleasant. I think football is a cruel and very nasty thing at times. However, based purely on ability, based purely on what Spurs want to be, he just isn't good enough. And we know this. Like we can't continue to have these type of discussions year after year after year after year about players. Like we just have to get to a point as a club where we just get brutal. And obviously, there's nothing we can do right now. We have the squad that we have. But I'm just talking about like the results, the way we're playing right now is, in my opinion, a result of the types of players that we have available to us, the lack of quality that we have available to us. And if the club, if the owners really want to make a change, then they've got to start being brutal. They have to keep spending money and they have to improve. And I'm not talking about signing superstars constantly, right? I'm not saying spend hundreds of millions of pounds on players time after time after time. But as I was saying with Joel in the pod the other day, you look at a player like Trossard. That was the example. Trossard, who Arsenal signed, right? He's not a superstar, but an above average performer, way above average performer at Brighton. Clearly, very talented player that Arsenal managed to pick up kind of on the cheap. Who they don't have to play week in week out. They don't constantly have to play him, but more often than not, when he does play for them, he ends up being one of their best and most influential players. We need to get smarter. We need to get smarter with the type of business that we do. We need to just bring in players that we know are good. I want to see us keep taking risks. I want to see us still keep bringing in the Bergvolds, the Archie Greys, and so on and so forth. But also, I want to see us improve the overall quality of the squad. Um, and I think until Spurs do that, we are going to continue to have frustrating afternoons like Wolverhampton Wanderers, frustrating evenings like today. But this is the point that I land on with this is that I'm not going to blame Frank for this. I don't think it's worth blaming Frank for this because what he is doing within his control, in my opinion, at least, is putting in more of a floor for us. We're not losing these games that we're going behind in for the most part, Bournemouth obviously, but we're not losing these games that we're going behind in. We are fighting. And I think I mean, just look at how much better we looked when Xavi Simons, Mohamed Kudus come onto the pitch. You know, you can't see like how much of a lift adding personnel of that quality into the mix. That's a really garbled sentence, but essentially, you can't look at that and say that there wasn't a huge lift when players of a certain quality suddenly entered the pitch, right? That's just simply the case. And if the likes of Brennan Johnson, Wilson Odobert, who personally I think is a very promising player, has a lot of ability, but is not ready yet, in my opinion. Um, if these guys can't if they can't beat a team like Bodo Glimt, with all due respect and all that type of thing, then it's just an indication that we don't have enough good players. You know, and I'm kind of repeating myself here, but you know, I'm not going to sort of throw Frank under the bus for this. And at the same time, you know, although that's kind of been a bit of a sort of a rant about playing staff and a rant about Levy and the legacy of it and all that type of thing, don't take this as like I'm kind of feeling like this season's over until we spend loads of money in January or we spend loads of money in summer. Like I still think that we've started this season really, really well. We're still in the sort of I mean, let's wait and see until this sort of match day is finished. But right now, we're sat fourth in the Champions League. Who knows where that goes? We're sat fourth in the Premier League. We're doing all right. Like we're doing all right, and I fully expect this to be a more positive season. I wouldn't be surprised to see us win a trophy. I would love to see us win a trophy, obviously. Um, I kind of feel like we might. I kind of feel like the sort of resilience that we've shown at times could see us win something. So I think there's plenty to be positive about. I just think it's obviously a frustrating evening, and it was a frustrating game against Wolves, wasn't it? It just was, and so one has followed the other, and of course, this conversation is gonna sort of bleed out in this way. But I just, there's it's like the too long didn't read, isn't it? Like ultimately, I kind of feel like we were all right once our good players came on, and as such, the reason why we played so badly today is because the other players weren't good enough. So I'm not going to sit here and eviscerate Frank and his tactics and all that type of stuff because I don't really buy that. I just quite simply don't think there's enough quality in the Tottenham team. Um, Hacker BLCPS says, I wonder if Frank modelled the first half after Ange's lineup. Barely remember it though, to be quite honest. I'm not sure, mate, either. John Benfield says, smelly, smelly game. Ben Mathis says, I cannot argue against the resolve of this lot, but we need to find a way to start creating chances. Yep, agreed. T Pace says, I missed all up to Bodo's second goal. Xavi again poor, and Kudus holds onto the ball too long a lot. I don't know, mate. Look, if you missed all the way up to Bodo's second goal, it was night and day since those two lads came on. So I'm not going to be sort of throwing them under the bus at all, to be honest. Jack Underhill says, Christ on a broomstick, that was dire. What was the plan? Park every conceivable bus in the Arctic whilst trying to score exclusively in the last 10 minutes. Sounds like Jack isn't too fond of Tommy Frank there. Chris Tucker says, Johnson really poor. He spent more time... I don't know what that's in reference to, so I'm not going to say that. He makes Chris Tucker says he makes like some salacious accusation about what Brennan Johnson's been doing, as opposed to attacking the Glimt defence. Freddie SP says seeing Bodo have 73% possession is a managerial issue. He needs to find solutions in terms of what we do in possession. I'm not 100% convinced by Frank yet. Yeah. Is it a managerial issue though, or is it a personnel thing? Bentancur was abysmal today. There's talk of him getting a new contract. No, no. Get him out the door. Like for me, he's washed. He's a placeholder footballer for me now. Not good enough. Just isn't good enough. I don't think he influences games. I don't think he affects games enough. He doesn't control games. He doesn't add a sense of calm or any sort of balance to our midfield whatsoever. I just I don't rate him at all. I actually don't rate Bentancur at all. I think he's actively bad now. That's it's just how I feel about it. So I think, yeah, I blame our lack of control in midfield for, reduced amount of possession. Eamon Murphy says large part of that game was worse than the dark days under Ange. Just remember Tamworth, mate. Tamworth, we didn't manage to get one. But, I mean, we looked like the second best team against a load of plumbers and car mechanics. Like Tamworth was a ridiculously bad game, and we were awful for 18 months under Ange. So, nah, I'm not having that. Newman says this is totally reactionary, but Johnson should never see minutes again. Seems like a nice guy, but my God, if he's not finishing, he's terrible. He's terrible at everything else. Yep. Gage Reynolds says it feels like we only score from own goals and set pieces. Worrying. I mean, Arsenal have done all right doing that, to be fair. Dan Strickland says, wasn't the right 11 to start. Ponderous in the first half. Second half better, but still not great signs going forwards. Newman says, what's that? Like his defending as a whole is horrible, but look at him for their first goal, infuriating. I'm not sure entirely what you mean there, Newman, mate. Sorry. Um, Grant Echo Sonic says far too many good chances on our goal. Better teams will punish us. Um, Hacker BL CPS also says we have no central play. It's all tap tap pass up the sides and then losing the ball. Um, Robert Glentworth says shout out to Archie Gray for his off ball runs and forward intent. Yes, second goal was a result of him and his play. You know, a really talented player, and a really exciting one. Um, Keyboard Warrior says that point is papering over widening cracks. I can't profess to know what the answer is, but it's looking increasingly like Frank isn't the answer. I mean, that I just think that's a knee jerk opinion, mate. I'm sorry. That's. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to publicly shame you, but it's just my response to that is I just think it's a knee jerk opinion, really. I don't think you can be saying that it increasingly looks like Frank isn't the answer after a handful of football matches. Just um, Robert says, "Have you seen Potch with the US team? Not pretty." Yeah, but I mean, come on, man. Like, sorry to any US listeners, but let's be real. Um, Tom Bicknell says, "Poor game, but less than 10 games in. Need to give Frank time. Coming back from 2-0 down twice in 4 days is positive. We move." Um, It was 1-0, wasn't it, against Wolves? Just saying, Tom, but I know what you're saying. Coming back from behind, um, twice in 4 days is positive. Andy P says 3 games running Vicario has cost us a goal. How much longer does he get before giving Kinski a run of games? Agreed. It's almost feeling a bit Brad Friedland, Hugo Lloris, but not quite as pronounced as that. That's actually a poor example. Sorry, I redact that, retract it, whatever. James Nicholson says, I like Frank as a guy and his attitude. At the moment, I hate his football. I cannot see any plan to our attacking game. And as we try harder, we lose our defensive strength as well. Just not a fan. Robert says, Vicario playing stinkers game on game. That has an impact. Yeah. John Benfield also says, I'm staying calm, but it's concerning. Madders is out, Xavi's settling, and we're still desperate for a left wing and a striker. 5 starters missing today, but even so far, our basic passing is so poor. Yeah. Anon says you'd have to go back before 2008, 2009 to find a worse front line than what we have now. James Reed says, in my opinion, we now have a huge sample size of matches with which to conclude that Johnson, Porro, interesting, Bentancur and Vicario need to be succeeded by fresh blood. I'm surprised you put Porro in there, mate. I really am. I agree with you on all of those aside for Porro, who I think has been one of our better players for quite a few months now, really. Jack Out says, hard to win away in Europe. Probably be harder to come from 2-0 down. People are getting too worked up too early on. Yep, probably true. Deuces Wild says, credit to Bodo Glimt. They came in with the ambition to play good football and would have been deserved winners. Yeah, they would have been deserved winners. I think they can probably feel hard done by today, actually, really. Just Gems also says, Miss Cootie tonight, Van der Ven got proper rattled, was captain too much. Yeah, he did get really rattled, and he was after his goal, after he got the goal disallowed for pulling that lad's shirt, he immediately ran back, and I thought he was going to get a red. I genuinely thought he was going to get a red. It shouldn't have been, but I thought the ref might have felt like it was rash, and it was rash. It was a rash challenge. K9 McGurn says, have to actively remind myself we're still so early in Frank's time. Um, mm, Keyboard Warrior says, you've just spent as long as the VAR check for our second, blaming tonight's performance on history. Well, you know, I think it's a bit silly to not consider that things that have happened leading up to this point might have an effect on today. Um, so there we go. I mean, I think it's, I think you've spent the past few streams on here basically saying that Thomas Frank should go already. So I think I'm kind of seeing where you're coming from, chap. Anon, has Johnson ever played centre forwards for us? Feel like he'd do better there than ghosting it out on the wing. No, I don't think he has. That's something we've always sort of spoken about. But, you know, do we think he's any good? I don't know. I'm not so sure. Um, uh, Bobby Chocolate says, I now have an irrational hatred for a smug something little Norwegian team I'd never heard of last year. Um, I do know what you mean, but I sort of quite like how they played today. They were, I couldn't, they were good. Ads Dice says the floor is so much higher than under Ange. We need to build from the back and create a solid base for new forwards to come into. Frank needs time to get his own forward line, but midfield is a problem. Chris also says Odobert and Tell aren't going to make it in the Premier League. They won't develop as bit part players and aren't good enough to get significant minutes. Paul King says, good evening, Jack. I'm convinced Frank's over rotation is having a negative effect on us. Xavi needs a run at number 10, and Odobert, despite yet another week showing, needs a run left wing. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I was sort of moaning last game about the fact that Frank is tinkering quite a bit. I guess he probably is just trying to work out what his best 11 is. But yeah, there is a lot of tinkering there, isn't there, going on? I think we all want Xavi to play centrally, but we don't really seem to have a good enough option, do we, to play out on the left? So, although he was sort of coming inside, if you like, and playing as a sort of de facto number 10 against Wolves, wasn't he? So, I just think he's settling in. I think the team's sort of settling in a bit. Mega Manger Danger says very bad. Another smash and grab. Andrew Woolridge says, thoughts on the Suarez quotes? I haven't heard them. Don't know what they are. Sorry, mate. And I reckon, yeah, I'll do the players. I'll do the players quite quickly, but I think I've sort of exhausted the chat tonight, to be honest. Let's have a look. So, Vicario, not a particularly good performance, I don't think. Could he have done better with the goals? Maybe. Probably a bit harsh. The first one was a really good opportunity. When they almost won it at the death with that 3-2, it was basically a carbon copy of their second goal. He was absolutely screaming at his defence. I think Danso didn't show himself in glory there, but to be honest, I'm just overall over Vicario. I think he needs to go. I just don't think he's good enough. Pedro Porro, defensively, maybe a bit suspect tonight, but still gives us a lot going forwards. Was whipping a lot of balls in. A good player, one of our better players. Kevin Danso. I'm actually a big fan of Dance. I have been to this point, but I thought he was poor tonight. I don't think he looked very composed. I think he got caught somewhat flat-footed a few times by Bodo. Yeah, yeah. Mickey van der Ven. Yeah, an overall good performance. I think being captain was maybe a bit much for him. I don't think he looked quite as settled as he does when he's got Romero alongside him, but he can be forgiven that. He's a great player, but you know, whatever. Not his best night, but I still think he was one of our better players, and he scored as well. So well on. Jed Spence largely ineffective, really. I think we're sort of seeing another one of those periods with Jed Spence when he needs to sort of, I don't know, whatever it is, fight through it and show us his best again. A lot of people are sort of being quite quick to say he's getting a bit high on his own sort of hype and all that type of thing. Who knows? I don't know about that, but what I can say is I just don't think he's looked as good as he has at certain points. Lucas Bergvall game sort of passed him by a bit tonight. I think not a vintage performance from him. And I'd also say that of Pat Matasar, and I largely blame Rodrigo Bentancur for that. To be honest, um, I think the lack of control afforded to the midfield by Bentancur and his presence there in that anchoring role really meant that it was always going to be a tougher job for Bergvall and Sarr to kind of do their thing. Um, Maybe that is letting them off the hook a bit, but that's just kind of how I feel about it. I do feel like things would have looked different had Polina been there in the middle. Brennan Johnson, I've spoken about him a lot. Not good enough. Wilson Odobert, tidy at times. I really thought he'd equalised when he got that header right at the end. I actually cheered and then felt like a prat in my living room as it hit the sort of. I think it hit the post in the end. Did it? Richarlison fluffed an opportunity right at the start, didn't he? And you know, I don't even think he got the goal in the end. I guess he was in the right place to put pressure on the defender. So I guess you have to give him some sort of credit for that. But just not a good performance and just not a good enough player. Xavi Simons, I think when he came on was pretty bright. I would have liked to have seen a bit more from him. If I'm being honest, if I'm speaking my truth, I would have liked to have seen a bit more from him. But he came on 60 minutes into a sort of pretty hostile environment, and we saw that the impact that his presence had on the game. Ultimately, it was a positive one. Same also Mohamed Kudus. I think it was a good performance from him. João Palhinha gave us that control. We started to dominate the game as soon as he came on and we had that platform to build upon, to create chances, to play the ball in the opposition half with more ease, with more control. It's what he does. I honestly, it's one of those now where I can't, I'm not gonna facilitate or entertain any of the kind of João Palhinha isn't actually good takes. He's clearly brilliant, you know? Like, is there a question as to whether or not we sign him for, what is it, 24 million euros or something? Absolutely not. Get him in. He's quality. Um, Destiny Doggy, I thought actually was really good when he came on, unsurprisingly. See also Archie Gray, really good, really positive. Whatever, maybe Bodo was starting to get a bit tired. They didn't really make any subs until quite late on. So, maybe just the occasion was getting to them a bit. But we rescued a point. It is frustrating. And I haven't at any point tried to pretend that it wasn't. I haven't at any point tried to sort of make out that anybody that is frustrated by tonight is knee jerk or is, whatever. Shouldn't be annoyed by that. But, I do think there are some positives there, and I think there are plenty of positives to like Frank's start as a manager. Hopefully, it will be all great and wonderful and brilliant. And I don't know, Thanks very much for watching or listening today, tonight, whenever you are listening or watching. If you are watching, Please drop it a like. Drop the stream a like. If you are listening to the pod via Spotify, please drop it a 5-star rating. See also, if you're listening via Apple Podcasts, leave it a rating, leave it a review. Thank you very much. That helps the pod to get discovered by new people. Lots of you have done that, so I do thank you very much. And slowly but surely, the pod continues to grow, which is great, really nice. And if you are one of the new listeners who has come thus far this season, hello, welcome. Thanks for, don't know, getting involved. People always say stuff like that, don't they? Like these sort of throwaway, like, thanks for getting involved. We move, making out like we're one team, and all that sort of thing. You're just listening to some prat doing a podcast, in and amongst all the other prats that you listen to doing podcasts. I'm the same, you know. I listen to plenty of podcasts from loads of different people. You know, I don't really feel any sort of affinity with them. It's just somebody that I listen to talking about something I'm interested in. But if you like the way at least that I talk about it, then thanks. Cheers. Keep coming back. Leave a rating, leave a review. If you really, really like it, if you really like me, patreon.com/RTRpod, where you can get ad-free podcasts and you can get different podcasts that aren't available on the main feeds. Preview pods and the odd occasional little things like during summer and stuff, I'll put out sort of different little content series and things like that, which are all archived as collections and stuff. So you can come and listen to a collection of evergreen podcasts that are kind of amassing as the years go by on Patreon. So patreon.com/RTRpods. Right. Time for bed. You know, could have been worse. Let's just say that. It could have been worse. Until we meet again, up the Spurs. Come on, you Spurs. Much love.